Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Make More Money and Work Less, aka an introduction to yield management. My name is Matt Baer. I'm the founder of Q4Launch, and I'm excited that you guys are along for the ride with us as we dive into this topic today. There's probably no better subject line for a webinar we've had than that one. There's probably also nothing that sounds more spammy than that subject line. But as we talk about yield management, we talk about revenue management, very similar things, different names. That's ultimately what we're going to try to talk about today, how to make more money and work less. And it may not necessarily seem like that at first. The ultimate goal is the first part of that, right? How to make more money. But as we talk about that, what you may find, and what we've heard from some of our customers, is that they actually, in some cases, lower occupancy rates by doing this, but increase revenue. And we're going to unpack all this. But if we increase revenue and at the same time lower occupancy rates, we're lowering our costs, and in turn, we're making more money and working less. So those conversations with our customers is kind of the foundation for today's title. Excited you guys are with us. Appreciate your patience as we had to reschedule from yesterday. Had something pop up at the last minute that I had to take care of and couldn't make this yesterday. So thank you for those of you that were able to slide it to your calendar today. Everybody else, many requests coming in for recordings because of the scheduling change, and we will definitely get that replay of today's recording out and make that available for about a week for those of you that are catching the replay. So again, my name is Matt. I'm the founder of Q4Launch. We're excited you're with us as we dive into this fun and very important conversation. If you follow our webinars on a regular series, you know that we bring these to you about every 2 weeks or so, about twice a month. And we're excited for some of the things we have coming up in March with our calendar, which will be announced here just in the next few days. So we're finalizing some of those details and dates. But if you're new to this, this is something we do. We share some of the things we're working on, some of the ideas we have, real data, and we want to educate you through that. Much of our topics are very marketing focused. Today's topic is going to get into a little bit of economics. So for those of you that came through business school, you took Economics 101. That's about as deep as we're probably going to get from an economic perspective today. But it's an important part of things. If you didn't go to business school, we know we have a lot of customers that went through some type of creative arts program, and the business side of their business can sometimes be a little bit new to them. We're excited you're here today as well, and we're going to try to present these economic principles at a relatively entry-level perspective so that you can, do that. But no matter where you are in your career, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's a very advanced economist, still had to remind them of the importance of understanding supply and demand as it comes to pricing decisions. So lots of different places we all come from as we approach our businesses, which for many of us weren't our first career, but we found our way into the hospitality business and discovered a passion for it there, and we never looked back because we've realized how great of a space it is to work. So enough introduction. Let's just get right to it and dive into our topic together today. So what is yield management? Essentially, yield management, revenue management, is changing your prices to match fluctuations in supply and demand. Is more the yield management part of it. The revenue management part of it is managing your pricing strategy ultimately to maximize your revenue. That's what we're optimizing for. We're optimizing for maximizing that revenue. And something else, you're probably already doing this on a basic level. If you're doing seasonal or weekend pricing of any kind, you're doing yield management at a very basic level. This topic is something we get a lot of pushback on. I've taught this at various conferences. I probably get more pushback on people on this topic than just about anything else. As I teach about email marketing, people are like, yeah, that's a good idea. I get a good bit of pushback on email marketing too, but it's a good idea. I'll go with you there. Social media marketing, nobody really pushes back on. Search engine optimization, nobody really pushes back on. But for whatever reason, people have this emotional connection to price. We're going to try to break some of those myths today. And we're going to try to break some of those barriers you may have in your own mind about pricing and pricing strategy. So that's one of my goals for you today, is to get you over that, any mental barriers you may have about whether you should be doing this or not. So as we look at that, let's talk about that for a minute. Who uses yield management? First and foremost, and the ones that we probably all most commonly interact with, is airlines. And the most common customer interaction with yield management is typically airlines. And I think this is part of why there's some angst around it, because people don't necessarily love how the airlines do yield management. We were actually searching for tickets for a conference we're going to in March. and there's a good number of our team going to the conference. And just by searching for it multiple times, as multiple of us were working on planning that travel, the price jumped up significantly in the midst of us searching before we could even book. And I'm pretty convinced that was just because a bunch of us were searching for the exact same flights, when in reality we shouldn't have been. They saw that search volume in their system, and it was an indicator of demand. They raised their price. Car rental agencies, of course, do this quite frequently. Sporting event and music venues do this quite frequently. Attractions do this quite frequently. Hotels have been doing this for years. Basically, everyone in the hospitality business. We're even starting to see more and more restaurants moving into this type of strategy. Now, you see it less in the restaurant business. I'd say that's a new frontier for the restaurant industry in some ways. But some really innovative restaurateurs are using some really interesting pricing strategies as it relates to food that they may have and trying to drive purchasing behavior around food that may spoil. In our business, in the hospitality business, whether you're a vacation rental manager, you're a hotelier, you're an innkeeper, we have something that spoils every single night. Our inventory spoils every single night it's not booked. So when you think about spoilage, it's a really big deal to us in our space. Years ago, probably 2 years ago at this point, Disney made a big announcement that they were going to start using yield management on their tickets. And it wasn't that they were going to lower prices in off-peak times. I believe the way they announced it was that was going to become their standard price, and then they were going to raise prices in even more peak times to try to encourage people to go in off-peak times. But everybody is interacting with yield management at some level. I guarantee you no consumer will do business with you this year that has not interacted with yield management at some level. I would extend that comment to say on the trip that they're booking with you, they will interact with yield management. Whether it's your yield management or it's somebody else's yield management, on the trip they're booking with you, they will interact with someone's yield management or revenue management. And they most definitely have interacted with it at some point in the past. Whether they could call it that or they know they've interacted with it, they have interacted with it. And my point for you on this is that everyone's doing it. And yeah, my mama taught me the same thing she taught you growing up. If everybody's jumping off the bridge, would you jump off the bridge? And of course, as the adventure junkie that I am, I would always say, yeah, I would probably be the first guy jumping off the bridge. Partially because I love testing new ideas, partially because I'm an adventure junkie and love jumping off of bridges. But that's a separate issue that my mom had to deal with all my growing up years. But the point is, and what we want you to take away is, if you're not doing this in your business now, you really need to be opening yourself up. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in this space in the last 3 years inside the area that we work, and probably more so in the last 6 months than ever before. We've seen more conversations around revenue management and yield management with our customers than ever before. More of them adopting automated yielding platforms that are automatically changing price and yielding price for them. And as a company, we have launched API integrations with several of those companies as well to continue to serve our customers better and better. But this is a really important topic, and not to sound cliche, but everybody's doing it. So let's kind of get you the basics here. This is kind of your economics 101 level as we give you an introduction to supply and demand. Where supply and demand meet, you have the perfect price for the quantity of units that you have. So quantity is on that bottom line, price is on that top line, the X and the Y axis, to kind of go back to your days there of college or maybe high school if you were advanced. But that's what we're trying to find, is that equilibrium point where price and quantity are at the perfect moment and they meet. If supply exceeds demand, price goes down. If demand exceeds supply, price theoretically goes up. So that's what we're trying to optimize for, is finding that perfect equilibrium where supply and demand meet. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this today. But what you have to understand is looking at those two things. Those are the two metrics that are ultimately going to be driving price. And yes, there's tons of other things that factor into price. We're going to speak to some of those today. But at a basic economic level, supply and demand is what drives price. And that's where you've really got to hone in and understand those concepts of supply and demand. We're also going to use the chat panel for question and answer today throughout our time. I already see some people blowing that up. I'm guessing those are the people that got the creative arts degree and we're already on slide 3 or 4 and hitting me on supply and demand. But hit the chat panel. We'll do our best to answer your questions. I'm not an economics professor, but I'm a little bit of an economics geek. And we have several of our staff with economics degrees. So if I can't answer it, I'll just walk out there and find somebody else who's a lot smarter than I am to answer your question. But please do use the chat panel or our question and answer panel for that today. So let's talk a little bit about supply. Supply is the number of rooms or units that you have. So maybe you're a hotel, maybe you're an innkeeper, number of rooms you have typically, although I know many of you have cottages and various other things. If you're a vacational manager, number of houses or condos or units that you have. So to kind of speak to all of our audience who's tuning in today, thinking about that as a number of units. For most of us, this rarely changes. So we will assume supply is fixed throughout the year, right? Supply is a relatively fixed number. If you have 50 rooms, you have 50 rooms. If you have 50 homes, you have 50 homes. And I know there's some fluctuation, especially on the vacational manager side of that, but there's not a ton of fluctuation. So we're going to assume that that stays pretty much fixed throughout the year as it relates to your supply. But we're going to talk about supply in your marketplace as well. And it's important to differentiate those two things because you have your supply of product that you're trying to sell, right? Product being rooms or units. But the marketplace also has a supply of competitive rooms or units that the marketplace is trying to sell. And you've got to look at both of those equations of supply. And then demand ultimately equals the number of people who want to book a specific unit for a specific period of time. And that's some important language that we chose very much on purpose there, specific unit for a specific period of time, because we know there's an exact number of people that want to book a hotel room or a B&B room for a specific period of time. Very different than the number of people that want to book a 10-bedroom house for a specific period for a specific time. So understanding what those look like. There's a specific group of people that's coming for 3 nights versus 2 nights versus an entire week. All of these are things you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about who's coming to our destination. We also know this fluctuates greatly throughout the year. Pretty much all of us understand that the demand for our product, demand for our destination, fluctuates greatly throughout the year, and that has led to much of the seasonality you probably have in your pricing strategy already. And that's where yield management is coming in at the most basic level. So like, if this is a brand new concept for you, you may want to punch out right now at the 12-minute mark here and just take that and unpack that and really process that. Definitely stay with us for the rest of the webinar, but if nothing else, kind of understand and unpack what we've talked about so far and wrap your head around that and come back to the webinar and try to pick up some of these other concepts we're going to move into. But we have to understand those basics of supply and demand before we can move deeper into this topic successfully. So make sure you understand that, and then you can move deeper into the topic successfully. All right, so where supply and demand meet, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, you will find the perfect price. And there's a couple things we want to talk about as it relates to the perfect price. Equilibrium is what we called it earlier. It means a couple things. One, how much you feel your room or property is worth is irrelevant. And I'm sharing this with you because this is one of the most common pushbacks I get on this. Well, I don't feel like it's worth that. And it's usually on the side where we're telling people, you sold out your inventory, you need to raise your price. It's usually related to that. Well, I don't feel like it's worth more than that. Well, the market has told you it's worth more than that. You selling out means it's worth more than that because there were more people willing to buy your product than supply you had for your product. AKA, if you sold out, demand exceeded supply, you should have raised your price. And that's what we're after here. Supply and demand to determine what your room or your property is worth, not what you feel about it. And then as we're thinking about that as well, tying back to that point I made earlier, your guests are already used to price changes, AKA yield management, for everything else they buy. So you've got to lean into this a little bit and understand, kind of get past that hurdle. And I'm sharing that one again because that's one of the biggest pushbacks we get on this as well is, well, my guests are going to be upset. If I implement this, I will upset my loyal guests. And you might, and they might call you and complain. And then you have an opportunity to make a choice on what are you going to do with that loyal guest. Are you going to honor the rate they paid last year? Maybe, because they're a loyal guest and they've been coming every year for 10 years, and that's fine. That's an okay business decision to make. But just because 1 or 2 people complain doesn't mean you should ignore it for everybody else. And there's a tremendous amount of opportunity you're probably leaving on the table if you're not doing this at some level already. So let's talk about the demand piece a little bit. Great marketing increases demand. And as I shared with you at the top of the hour, if this is your first time with us, essentially we are a web design and marketing agency who considers ourselves to be in the demand generation business or revenue generation business. That's what our job is. Our hoteliers, our innkeepers, our vacation rental managers hire us to drive demand for their product. And that's what we have developed a great niche in doing with our customers. So if you're doing great marketing, that is going to increase demand. If you're thinking about, okay, well, I've got my supply, and maybe I'm not even selling all the supply I have right now, so I'm not in a season where I need to be thinking about yield management or raising prices. You may need to be thinking about marketing and how are you doing that differently, and are you doing that well? But if you're investing in increased marketing in 2019, this could also be a good year to start with yield management or revenue management. If you're not investing in increased marketing in 2019, you're probably setting yourself up to have the same or possibly worse year than you're having in 2018. And I'm going to talk about why your year may be worse in a little bit as well. So how does the quality of your property, service, and amenities factor in? That's a question we get quite often. And it's a difficult one. We all know quality, service, and amenities are huge factors as it comes to price. It can't all just be supply and demand, right? But it ultimately is, because quality is one of the factors that drives demand. So when we think about supply and demand, demand has sub-factors inside of it that equal together and create demand, or that come together to create demand. Quality, service, amenities, reviews, marketing, all of these things are coming together to equal demand for your product. And you can break that down into different levels and say, okay, as I'm driving demand, we just talked about great marketing. That's part of how we're driving demand. Quality is an important component of driving demand. Service is an important component of driving demand. Amenities are an important component of driving demand as well. And you can start breaking this down into sectors of the population. You know, and I'm just going to use this example. There's a significant part of the population. There's actually more demand for a 2-star hotel than there is a 5-star hotel, because there's more people who will spend that kind of money. That doesn't necessarily drive the price higher, but it starts closing the gap between the 2-star hotel and the 5-star hotel from a price perspective based on supply and demand. And as you raise quality, higher quality equals higher demand, and the more someone is willing to pay for your product at a basic level. You've probably had this experience as a consumer where you've said, okay, I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that type of experience than this experience. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for the 5-star hotel than the 2-star hotel. And that's a little bit different for everybody, because everyone is interpreting quality, service, amenities, and attaching a different value to them. But as you're thinking through that, that's what you're ultimately trying to put all these elements together to come to a place where you're getting a pricing strategy. So are you a good candidate for yield management? This is a question we get a lot as well. And I will tell you right now, doing yield management can be a very time-consuming thing, especially in the vacation rental space, where no 2 units, well, and that's not completely true, but for most of our vacation rental managers, no 2 units are the same. For some of them, you may have a bunch of condos in the same condo building, and they're all relatively the same. For hotels, it's much, much simpler, because traditional hotels have 4 or 5 room types, and every single one of those rooms is almost identical. Every single one of those rooms is a template that they have scaled to 100, 200, 500 rooms, however many it is. So they actually have a much simpler time of doing yield management or revenue management. B&Bs kind of in the middle there have a really challenging time with it as well, because every room needs to be evaluated differently. If you're not selling by room type, but you're selling by individual room name or number, and every room is unique, that's great, that's special, that's awesome, but it makes it difficult. You can't always necessarily apply the same yield management rules to every single room you have, because demand for different rooms is going to be different. You might have queen rooms, you might have king rooms, you might have rooms with balcony, you might have rooms with hot tubs, you might have room with whirlpool tubs, you might have rooms that are oceanfront, not oceanfront. Like, all of these things factor into the demand for that particular room. So if you're a B&B and you have individual room types, it is significantly more challenging, but you can still make some progress. And you can still set some general rules that help do this without this becoming your full-time job. because most hotels, most significant hotels from a size perspective, this is a full-time job. Like someone's full-time job is just managing this piece of things, and that's not feasible for most vacation rental managers. It's not feasible for most boutique hotels or most B&Bs to have a person dedicated to just doing this full-time. So how can we build some systems and processes to be able to do that? We're going to touch on that a little bit today. It gets a lot more in depth. That's more of like a 201 level, but we're going to touch on it briefly. And hopefully you can take some of what you learned today and springboard into that. But are you a good candidate? Do you run 70% plus occupancy for any specific period of the year? And I would say the answer probably for everyone on this call is yes, I do. You may not run 70% for 3 months. You may not run 70% for the whole year, or you may run well more than that for the whole year. I don't know, but I would bet everybody runs 70% plus occupancy for any specific period of the year. And part of that is, do you routinely sell out specific periods of the year, even if it's just your weekends? You know, I was talking to a customer, a boutique hotel in Minnesota, and they told me, you know, we sell out all the time on weekends. We don't really need any help with that. And I was like, well, yes, you don't need any help selling out weekends at the price point you're charging now. But if our marketing comes together, even if it's not focused on that, if it comes together to drive more demand, you have an opportunity to raise price on the weekend. And as we're going to look at here in a few minutes, raising price can have a significant and exponential impact on profitability. So if more demand equals higher rates, how do we drive more demand? Great marketing, more website traffic equals more demand. So at a basic level, we've talked about a lot of things. Wanted to kind of recap that. But great marketing, great service, great quality, great amenities, and you can measure those things coming together by more website traffic. Website traffic's not it's not the end all be all, of course. It's got to be quality. It's got to be all these other things. But as we're looking at who is demanding our product, if I asked you the question, if we met at a conference and I said, how much demand is there for your product? Where would you even begin to answer that question? And it's a bit of a rudimentary example, but your website traffic essentially is a measure of demand for your product. How many people are coming to your website looking for your product? And then they're making a decision on whether they're going to buy it by lots of different factors. But at a basic level, that's one of the ways you can look at how do we measure how much demand there is for our product. And that can help you as you're thinking about different seasonalities and different rate structures and everything else as well. So how do I get started? That's what we want to, that's one of the things we want to give you as a springboard to be able to help you figure out how to get started. So look back at your last 2 years of occupancy data and analyze periods you ran higher than 70% occupancy. And this is just a general suggestion. I'm not saying ignore periods where you ran less than that, but that's a good place to start. Get an understanding of what good occupancy looks like in your local market. 60% might be good some parts of the year, and you might want to start yielding at different occupancy levels. You might not wait till you get to 70% to start yielding your price as you get closer to it. So just a few different things to think about there. We'd also encourage you to analyze occupancy on a per room or per unit level, because you may see you need to do it for certain rooms or accommodation types differently. You may find out that you're selling out of your king rooms at a much faster rate than you are your queen rooms, meaning there's greater demand for your king rooms than there are your queen rooms. Or you may find out that your oceanfront or your ski in, ski out properties sell out much faster than your non-ski in, ski out, non-oceanfront properties. And I get that most people aren't both those things. Trying to speak to our mountain and beach customers here, but that's one of the things that you've got to factor in. And when you look at those things and you start having those aha moments of, man, we've already sold out of all of our beach or all of our oceanfront stuff for summer, that's an indicator that, man, if every oceanfront house you have is already sold out, or every king bedroom you have is already sold out, you may have had your price too low for that part of your inventory. And if you're a vacation room manager, I said this is a lot more complicated for you, but you need to try to group your units into types, because ultimately, if you had all the time in the world, you would do this at each individual unit level and you would figure those things out. But nobody has all the time in the world. So grouping them into unit types may be beneficial. And you've got to figure out what are those right unit types for you. But I shared a couple of those: oceanfront versus one row off. Common to see that in our beach destinations. Or it could be large homes that are 6+ bedrooms versus 3 to 5 bedroom homes versus 2 bedrooms and less. maybe groups that you have. Like just starting to look at some of those different groups and look for trends across those groups and analyzing those trends to say, what does this tell me about supply and demand? What does this tell me about my revenue strategy, my pricing strategy, based off what I'm seeing here? And understanding that booking windows are very different for those things too. So the fact that all of your large oceanfront homes are booked out right now doesn't necessarily give you complete clarity to say, I need to raise my price. Ultimately, there's a lot of data points coming together, and we're trying to get you the high level, basic ones to help you be right the majority of the time. There's no data, there's no strategy that's going to help you be right 100% of the time. I wish there was. I wish I could be right 100% of the time. At least, that would be ideal. But it's just not that easy. No matter how much data we have, we're not going to be right 100% of the time, but we want to be right more than we're wrong. And we want to lean into this to start getting right more and more often. One of the most important parts of doing yield management and revenue management well, and unfortunately it's also one of the most challenging parts, and something that we're speaking a lot about in the industry and pushing a lot of people to push their software companies on, is this idea of pace and understanding what booking pace is. But ultimately what that means is it's the pace at which you're booking rooms for your future dates. So on today, which is February 27th, what do I have already booked for the rest of the year compared to February 27th, 2018? And looking at the rest of the year is somewhat helpful from a general perspective to say, how's my marketing? How is my overall strategy performing? How am I looking ahead at 2019 versus 2018? But really breaking that down into smaller chunks of time. Because if you look at the whole year, you may find out, as we were looking at a customer's booking pace the other day, and they're 30% ahead of pace right now for the year. Awesome. Everybody's feeling great. High on the hog. Everything's awesome. Our marketing machine's cranking. The new website's cranking. Everything's going awesome. But as we dove into that, we dug deeper. What we found was, yes, we're doing awesome for the year as a whole, but we've got a gap. Our April is a little bit softer than we want it to be. Our April is actually just even. Our April is even with last year. So if the whole year is 30% ahead of pace, but April's even, that means that something's going on in April that's different, and we need to look at April differently. So breaking down, and you can do this with any period of time. It could be you look at weekends specifically, although that's going to be a little bit harder. But you can look at different periods of time to understand, okay, for that specific period of time, how do I need to look at that period of time? Because doing that for this particular customer, we're able to say, overall, we're feeling really good. We're on path to have a great 2019 here. But we need to look at April differently. We need to understand what's going on with April, that it looks a little bit soft. And there's lots of reasons April might, and it doesn't look soft. It's just that when you look at a pace report that says we're 30% ahead and April's even, there's a gap there, right? So what do we need to be doing differently for April? So with that customer, for some customers, we're still pushing March. We're pushing last minute bookings because they've been heavily affected by the government shutdown, or they've been affected by bad weather or something else. We're pushing March hard right now. With some of our customers, we're already pushing the summertime because their spring's already set based on booking windows and other things. For that particular customer, it gave us the information that, hey, we don't need to worry about summer right now. We need to be focused on April. We're actually doing great for summer. We need to be focusing on April and creating some marketing strategy to drive April better. So these are the types of things we're looking at when we have the data available to us. Generally speaking, as it comes to changing your rates, if you're booking ahead of last year's pace, increase rate. It's an opportunity to increase rate. An opportunity to increase rate. If you're getting lots of requests for specific dates, as in that airline example I shared earlier, we kept searching for flights on these specific dates. Their algorithm triggered a price increase because they were getting lots of requests for those dates. It's an opportunity to increase rate. And that could be as unsophisticated as I'm getting lots of phone calls, something must be going on. And you might just at a gut level decide to increase rate, or your software may be telling you that as well. If your weekends are filling up ahead of your usual booking window, increase rate. I had a conversation with another customer that was, we were looking at some data, or I was doing it kind of through their customer experience manager on our team, giving them some guidance, but hey, we're already sold out for weekends in April and May, but we need some help on weekdays. And that's fine. That's pretty typical. And I told them, I was like, okay, that's great that we need help. And yes, we need to focus marketing on April and May, but we also need to look at their weekend rate, because if their weekends are already sold out, chances are we didn't have our price high enough. we missed some opportunity there from a pricing perspective. So that's important. Tracking turnaways can also be important. If you're getting lots of calls or lots of emails or whatever through your website and you're turning away a lot of reservations, you need to note that. You need to keep a journal, a Word document, I don't care where it is, but you need to note those things. Because if you're turning away a lot of business, what does that mean? It means demand exceeded supply and your price should have been higher. You're already sold out now, but you need to note that for next year and potentially raise price for those periods. Or just go ahead and go in your system and raise price for that period next year. High turnaway means your rate was too low. Some property management systems track this and some don't. And that's our frustration with this. And we talk to a lot of our customers about moving more onto systems that do track this and away from systems that don't track this. Most hotel systems track this. I would say almost all hotel systems track this. So I'm not going to name names in that space because almost all of them do. In the bed and breakfast world, in the boutique hotel world, Think Reservations tracks this and does a really good job. Some of the others claim they have this reporting, but it's actually not accurate, not very good. It's like they threw PACE on a report that's not actually a PACE report. So I'll give you that caveat. And in the vacation rental world, Streamline tracks pacing and does a pretty good job with it. And I'm sure there's others out there, but we haven't seen very many other property management software or systems in the vacational world that does a great job of tracking that. If you have a piece of software, a property management software that you feel like does a great job of PACE, love if you throw that in the chat panel for us, and I'll call out some of those things to other people who are attending today. So you can let us know kind of what that is for you and if that's helpful or not. But that's a really important thing to hone in on. Honestly, booking PACE is probably the single most important part of the revenue management and yield management decisions that you're going to make. It's probably the single most important piece of data that you can look at to make these decisions. But it's also one of the hardest to get because many property management systems don't have accurate data. So if your system doesn't, you can switch to one that does, or you can ask them and rally other users that you know and ask them to pressure your software to make it work better. We would love to see more people adopting that. So here's some pricing adjustments to consider. Always know your local events calendar and adjust price each year for events that sell you out. And you need to keep track of those things. You need to be on alerts about concerts that are coming out or any of those things because that will absolutely sell you out. Big concerts, big events will absolutely sell you out. So you need to know about it before the marketplace knows about it so that you can make your pricing adjustments accordingly. Monitor supply and your destination. I talked about this earlier. I mentioned that supply isn't just your supply. We talked about your supply, your rooms, your properties, but monitor supply in your destination. AirDNA is a great tool to monitor supply. Many of the destinations that we're working with our customers in are seeing record numbers of supply. And we talk about supply as far as how many new keys have come online in your market. I was talking to a customer yesterday and looking at that, and we were comparing some things. They were kind of comparing to 2015, which for many people, for various reasons, 2015 was just a banner year in a lot of ways inside the industry. They were like, what do we need to do to get back to 2015? And I just said, honestly, I've actually had this conversation with several customers in the last week, but honestly, we were in a different marketplace than we were in 2015, dramatically so. And there's so many reasons why we're in a different marketplace than we were in 2015. But a big part of this is what does the supply in your marketplace look like? How many keys have come online? And as we talk to them, there's 1,500 Airbnbs that didn't exist 3 years ago and are listed actively today in their marketplace. There was also 1,500 new hotel rooms that opened in their marketplace in 2017. So, and that was just through quick research published by their CVB. 1,500 new hotel rooms, aka keys, had come online in their marketplace in 2017. So to say there's been an influx of supply is an understatement. There's 3,000 keys they're competing with that they weren't competing against in 2015. 3,000 options for consumers to book. And that many more people we have to compete with to earn that business. And then the other part of that equation is the demand piece of that equation. And there are what's the demand for your product, which we talked about looking at website traffic, but there's also what's the demand for your marketplace and looking at Google trend data. And unfortunately, in their marketplace, searches for, this was for a hotel customer of ours, but searches for all of the hotel, lodging, places to stay, B&B type keywords had all trended down year over year. So this time last year, there was a higher level of, in 2017, there was a higher level of demand than there was in 2018. So in their marketplace, zooming out of their business and looking at the overall part of the business, and this is so important to understand for you as you're trying to unpack all of this, because it's not just what's going on in your business, but it's what's going on in the marketplace in which your business operates. There was a significant increase in supply and a significant trackable decline in demand, which makes for a challenging case to find yourself in. When there's been a significant increase in supply and a significant decline in demand, that's not a great place to find yourself in. Now, that doesn't mean, those are things you can't control. So what you have to do is then get busy, and this is ultimately what the majority of our conversation was about, is what's our marketing strategy for 2019 despite these things. I can't change these things. I can change how I respond. My response is my responsibility. So how am I going to respond from a marketing strategy perspective and look at things differently and make sure that I'm setting goals that are realistic based on what's going on in the marketplace that we're operating in? Something else to think about, do local market research on your competitive set. This is such an important part of this as far as understanding what's going on in your overall market. We would say start tracking it regularly in a spreadsheet to see when your competitors are yielding. If you have a regular tracking of your competitive set's pricing, you will understand when they are yielding. And then determine the price ranges that they yield within. Because the worst thing you can do is ignore your competitors. One of the also worst things you can do is set your price strictly off what your competitors are charging. So you need to have this information, use this information intelligently, but not base your pricing decisions strictly off what your competitors are doing. You can't ignore them, but it shouldn't be the main driver for your pricing strategy either. You need to figure that out with additional data, but this is one of the data points. And you need to track this on a regular basis. Not all that time consuming. Once you have a system in place to track it, you can spend 30 minutes a week, go get this data for a competitive set, and probably even less, probably 10 minutes, and go track this on a regular basis. But it's important data to have that will arm you for decision making. And we've talked about this as a time-consuming piece in a lot of ways, but once you've established your periods that qualify for this, you can establish some rules to live by. So this is not the ideal way to do revenue management that I'm laying out here on the screen for you, but it is a way to do it in a time or in a season where time is of the essence. So you can start creating some rate rules inside of your various pieces of software that says, as occupancy increases, raise my price. And this is just some examples, some very basic rate rules. This is like uber elementary yield management. So if you're an advanced yield manager and you're like, oh, that's not the best strategy, you're right, it's not. But if you're not doing this at all, this is probably better than doing nothing. So you can think about that as well. We'd rather do something than nothing, and we will get more and more advanced as we get more and more comfortable with it. So establish some rules to live by, and then monitor things on a regular basis and figure out what data points that I've shared with you today are going to drive those decisions for you. We talked a little bit about this, but this is such an important thing. Increased rate doesn't increase cost. So I'm going to use this super simple example. If you make a $50 profit on a $200 night, and that comes from the hotel industry. The hotel industry's average profit margin is about 25%. So that's where that information is coming from. If you make a $50 profit on a $200 night, you will make a $90 profit on a $240 night, right? Because if I increase my rate, but I'm delivering the exact same service, my cost doesn't increase. So what happens is a 20% increase in rate drives an 80% increase in profit. So these incremental changes in rate and ultimately driving your average daily rate and your average booking higher can make a significant impact in your profit margin at the end of the year. So that's why this is so important. And there's lots of ways to look at this. Picking up unbooked nights can also do this. It would lower your margin, but increase your overall profitability, which is where revenue management comes in play as well. And a lot of people think about revenue management specifically about lowering price. And that is part of it. You'll notice mostly today I've talked about increasing rate because I think that's an opportunity that exists for a lot of us that we're not taking advantage of. It may also be lowering price in certain times of year and certain periods, but that's not all the story is about. So I would love, this slide should like be on the wall in your office. You should screenshot this. You should print it. You should put it on. I should make a meme and share it on our social media page of this, because this is so important to understand the economics here. A 20% increase in rate, assuming that you still book it, can drive an 80% increase in profit. That is so huge. That can transform your business by just capturing that and figuring out how to put that at work in your business. As you're thinking about this, don't just think rate with yield management either. I'm going to move through this example pretty quickly here, but think minimum night stays. And this is an area vacation rental managers specifically really need to think differently. And I was talking to a brilliant vacation rental manager at ResFest this year, and he had seen a massive shift in his market away from the 7-night stays. Like, man, nobody's doing 7-night stays anymore. And I thought it was going to kill me at first. Like, I thought I was going to lose a lot of money because of this in the shorter stays. But what he found was by setting up his business a little bit differently, he started to turn his units on average twice a week instead of once a week. And because of his fee income, he actually increased revenue and increased profit margin at the same time by changing his minimum night stays. That's a whole hour-long story in and of itself. It's a brilliant story, but think differently about your minimum night stays. We also have a lot of data that says people are taking shorter vacations. So that's something you need to be thinking about. And how do you play with that when you're a vacation rental manager? Moving away from some of the weekly minimums that you might be used to in your marketplace and say, how do I capture that and do that effectively? So here's a quick example. This example is not based off of research data, so take it for what it is. But if 20% of, the example's on the next slide, but I'm going to set it up here. If 20% of weekend travelers stay 3 nights in your destination and you're routinely selling out your weekends, you may decide that you only need to sell to the 20% that are staying for 3 nights. Because an unbooked Thursday night that may have been picked up by a 3-night stay is absolutely huge. The third night you pick up there can be hugely profitable as it doesn't cost a full room turn. The third night for most B&Bs or hotels, and this is also true for vacation rental managers, a little bit less because most vacation rental managers won't do 2-night stays, although that may be something they need to look at because especially in urban areas, there's a tremendous amount of demand for 2-night stays. But you may need to think about that within your business. But that third night is hugely profitable. Also looking at minimum stays and varying those by season and events. I actually just went up to Oak Island in North Carolina. I had to remember where it was. Went up, ran a half marathon 2 weekends ago in Oak Island. I've got a young family, so nights away are always hard. Try to minimize those. So me and a friend went up, stayed the night before, got up at ridiculously early time, ran the half marathon, took a shower, got in the car, and headed back home. But we booked 2 nights at the hotel we stayed at because that was the minimum stay. So that hotel got a 2-night minimum booking from us, and we had to pay it, but we really only wanted to stay 1 night. So in that case, they increased their profitability by a lot. Now, as a consumer and being in the hotel business, I did them the service of checking out and saying, hey, we are checking out and we do not need this room tonight, so feel free to resell it. So they could open that room in their system, and being a Saturday night, they could end up selling that the day of and actually selling 3 nights in a 2-night period. Now, that's a very unique example, but it's important to understand those things because if that hotel had allowed us to, we would have booked a 1-night stay. But because they had a 2-night minimum and then all of their competitive set also had a 2-night minimum, we didn't have a choice but to either drive up the morning of at 3 a.m., which we didn't want to do, or book the 2-night stay. We booked the 2-night stay, paid a little bit more than we wanted to, but got it done, and that hotel got that business. Other opportunity to think about yield management a little bit differently. If you have a lot of drive-in business, offer an extend your stay special at check-in. So this is such a key thing. It's so easy to do. But train your staff, or you can automate this in certain systems. Most can't, but some can. Train your staff to, when a guest checks in, look at the night after they're coming, or look at the night that they're checking out. So if they're checking out on a Sunday, look at Sunday night, and train your staff At check-in, if you still do a front desk style check-in, to upsell that customer and say, hey, it looks like the room that you're staying in is actually available the night you're scheduled to be checking out. We would love to offer that to you at X% discount or whatever, and offer that extend your stay special at check-in. Or even better, if you can automate some of this, market it in a reservation confirmation email to be able to, a week out say, hey, the room you're staying in is available the night you're scheduled to check out. Would you like to extend your stay? And offering them some type of incentive to be able to do that. Once you've established your rules, automate as much as possible. We know how busy that you are and how hard this can be, but automate as much as possible. Lots of property management software and booking engines have basic automated yield management functionality inside of them, so automate as much as possible. Check your competitors weekly for multiple date sets. We talked about that competitive set earlier, creating a tracking spreadsheet, and update that tracking spreadsheet at least weekly. Wrap your head around this a little bit. This was the example I was talking about. Unbooked nights are not the enemy. This is one of the other key misconceptions I run into when I talk to people. Unbooked nights are not the enemy. Let's use this quick example. If you have 50 units and you book 40 of those for 3 nights at $200 a night, you ran 80% occupancy. You might consider that a failure for peak season, but you did $24,000 in revenue. 80% occupancy, $24,000, not bad. Alternative example, you have 50 units and you're of the mindset that unbooked nights are your enemy. 50 units, 50 book for 2 nights. Pat yourself on the back at your next revenue meeting in your area of HSMAI or whatever. You can tell people you were sold out. You have done it. You've crushed it as a revenue manager. At $200 a night, you did $20,000. Meanwhile, the revenue manager across the room tells you he ran 80% occupancy. You're judging him. What you're not understanding is that he's factoring in that Thursday night or that Sunday night that you're not, because he got that 3 nights. So he ran 80% occupancy for 3 nights. You ran 100% occupancy for 2 nights, and there's a decent chance, just looking at that example, that he actually booked more revenue than you did and was a more successful revenue manager. That is such a simplified example, and you could shoot so many holes in it. I fully understand that, but that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're after, is we're trying to drive greater room nights. And there's lots of ways to play with that equations, but chances are, if you are 100% booked, and I've said this I think 3 times already, if you're 100% booked, aka if you're sold out, chances are you left money on the table. So you need to think about that and understand unbooked nights are not the enemy. So I know we've got a few questions in the chat panel. I want to leave us a few minutes to get to those. If you have questions, please put those in the question or the chat panel. We'll get those questions answered. If there's anything we can do to help you specifically, feel free to get in touch with us. My information is directly on the screen. Whether you have questions about revenue management or you have marketing, you need marketing help. So many people are making big marketing moves right now to set themselves up for the best 2019 that they can have. The longer you wait, the more delayed your results are going to be from making 2019 the best year it can be. So if you're in that camp of, I need to increase my marketing this year, I need to get more aggressive in this area, I understand there's more competition, there's more supply than there's ever been, take action sooner than later. Get in touch with us. We would love to help you enhance your marketing services, your web presence, and ultimately drive more revenue in 2019. So let's jump into a couple of the questions here. Question from Kathleen. Have you ever jumped off the New River Bridge? Kathleen, I have no idea how high the New River Bridge is, and no, I have not. But I am familiar, I think, with the New River Gorge, and was actually just talking to some friends, if I'm thinking about the right place, about planning a trip up there. So we should definitely get in touch, because I would love to get up in that area, and whether that bridge is actually too high to jump off of. Highest bridge I've ever jumped off of was 80 feet. So I don't know, that's probably not smart. I was a much younger man back then, but it was fun. It hurt a little, but it was fun. Question here, Airbnb, or maybe a statement. Airbnb has distorted the supply side so much that yield management in my area is not worth it. I'd be chasing prices that don't make sense. Until supply and demand come more into equilibrium, yield management simply doesn't work. I don't know your specific area that well. Obviously, I know generally your area, but I don't know that yield management doesn't work. I mean, it's a basic economic principle, so it's hard for me to imagine. It may be harder to figure out. There may be too many factors. to make it worth figuring out. It may be take too long to figure it out. You might not have enough rooms to justify the cost of doing it well. But for the sake of everybody on the call, I wouldn't say that it doesn't work. I would say it may not be the right move for you and your business. Because generally I try not to go against like economic principles that have been proven true for years and years and generations after generations. And maybe I'm just misreading the question or the statement there. But generally speaking, it's an economic principle, and I believe it holds true in every market everywhere. But I also know that what's applicable and meaningful and realistic for one business isn't always the same for another business. And we run into this all the time. People will have a marketing idea they heard from somebody that's 10 times their size, and it works for that company because they're 10 times the size. It doesn't work for this company because they're a tenth of the size, and you can't approach both those businesses the same way. So we try to account for those things when we're teaching the topics and various things to understand, like, you've got to break this down and make it applicable for you. And then you have to get as advanced as makes sense for you and as much as you're going to get a return on your time. Most of us on today's call, it doesn't make sense to have a full-time revenue manager on our staff because the economic case is not there. You're not going to increase revenue by enough to justify that expense. Some of us might. So that's one of those things where you can't tell people you should have a revenue manager on your staff because it's not apples to apples for everybody. So hopefully that's helpful for everybody. Just a couple questions there. Actually, this is a very dense topic. It may be too dense, so we didn't get a ton of questions in our chat panel. But if you have any questions, happy to answer those for you. If not, then let me know. Oh, comment on the New River Bridge requires a bungee or a parachute, just so you know. I have done both of those things, so that's right up my alley. I've bungee jumped in New Zealand. And parachuted actually in the Charleston area where we're headquartered. But it sounds awesome. That'd be more base jumping, which I have not done, but would love to do. So we should definitely connect, Kathleen. You sound like my kind of style of adventure. Just confirm that we're getting a copy of this recording later today or tomorrow. Absolutely. We will be sending out a recording of this. That replay will be available for about a week. It will probably be tomorrow before we're able to get that out once we get the recording processed and everything and get that uploaded. But yes, we will get a copy of the recording out, and that replay will be available for about a week. So make sure you watch that replay before that replay expires. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully you got some action items from today's topic to be able to start applying into your business, figuring out where you are on this revenue management journey, and figuring out what's my next step from here. That's what we want you to do, is get some action items and figure out what's my next step from here. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.